So in this live stream, I'm going to be talking through all the different papers I've used for folding origami tessellations, and how you can find out what the best paper is for your use case. So starting off with a tessellation that I folded after trying to use this grid for other things. That's why there's a ton of markings on it. This is a sheet of printer paper. And what really hooked me on tessellations is the fact that I had drawn large hexagons in Sharpie that bled through to both sides. And you see these smaller hexagons on the back. So that's one benefit of the printer paper. You can have the Sharpie bleed through and then not worry too much about damaging what's sitting under it. Then I did my next, 200 or so tessellations, mostly in kami. These can range from fairly simple to fairly advanced. And the benefit of kami is it's very cheap and easy to find, but it is very easy to tear. And so I wouldn't necessarily recommend it for other people to start folding origami tessellations, especially with these teeny tiny grids. And while you can find kami in larger sizes, the weakness is the factor that makes me not want to recommend it. Like you can see in here, that rhombus just really did not want to squash well, especially if we zoom on into that particular rhombus is just really crumpled and doesn't look like the rest of them. So that's a downside of kami. And then you can use foil, but like you can see here, you can't really see the pattern. I can see it a little bit better without so much glare, but it's very difficult to make out that there's a hexagon twist here, there are rhombus twists here, a little bit easier to see from the backside, but you're never going to get this backlit. That's one benefit of the kami. You do get backlighting. One downside of the kami is it's often different colors on different sides unless you have a white piece. So it's really flashy, but also it's really hard to reverse the grid lines cleanly on foil paper. Then there's whatever paper is laying around. So this is like a baking paper. You can also use wax paper or butcher paper. So you can find large sheets of paper in your kitchen and just start folding with them. And that works pretty well. It has some of the same problems of weakness as kami, but you get a lot of it for cheap. And that can be a real benefit when you're experimenting and trying new things. Another paper that you can find in various places is maps. Sometimes there's just a pile of maps that people are trying to get rid of, and they're already split into even divisions, so very easy to add a grid to. They can be kind of worn out sometimes. They can be kind of weak. But they typically work pretty well, although they're pretty busy for deciphering what twists have actually been made. After I'd folded my first 200 or so tessellations, I went to an origami convention where someone had this scrap of elephant hide that they gave me, and also a bone folder, not this particular one, but another bone folder that they had for me to use. Up until that point, I'd just been using my thumb to do all of the gridding, all of the smoothing out. But with elephant hide, it's a tough enough paper that you really need that extra help, or you're going to wear down your joints really quickly. So this was the first paper, and that, like literally this paper, was the first paper that I used a bone folder on, and I've never gone back. Now, even when I'm folding kami, I'm using a bone folder. Then I learned about Tant, and started working with that kind of paper. And Tant comes in a lot of different colors, which is nice if you just want to look at them without light, but with backlighting, the selection of papers that show the light well is a bit more limited. And then even among this selection, the papers I would use for professional applications, like something I wanted to give to someone, is even more limited because these brighter colors are going to fade in the sunlight. So I would want to stick to colors that are pretty light already. So that's what's going on with Tant. And then once I started teaching origami tessellations online through Gathering Folds, one of my students introduced me to Skytone. Now, Skytone is a really nice paper. It's crisp, but not so crisp that you would absolutely need a bone folder like you do for elephant hide. Although I'll say if you're folding hundreds of patterns, definitely get a bone folder, or even dozens of patterns, really. And it's easy to fold because of that crispness. It's very tough. It's hard to puncture, hard to tear. And that makes it a lot more forgiving when you're trying out new patterns that you've never folded before. And then it comes in these nice light shades that are easy to backlight. So those are kind of the parameters that we're looking at. How hard is it to grid, both with being able to fold it back and forth on the exact same line, which as you get to thinner and thinner papers becomes more difficult, and how hard it is on your hand to physically make the creases, which gets harder as you get to thicker and thicker papers. Skytone is a nice middle of the road paper. I use the lightest version of Skytone. There's 4 different weights of it, and that's 89 GSM, grams per square meter, and we'll get into that a little bit more in a second. And if I want to have something a little bit bigger than Skytone, I often turn to butcher paper. But first I want to note, like, there's other reasons to change the thickness of your paper. And one of those is if you're going to laminate it. So with these laminated pieces, something that I can see holding it here is that there are little bubbles out to the sides of this one, and not as pronounced on this piece, but there still are some stress areas. But if I then do a very similar piece to this one in butcher paper, which is slightly thinner, I don't see those same bubbles around the outside. So that is a paper thickness thing, and if you're running it through a laminator, you're probably going to want a thinner paper. So speaking of thin papers, glassine, this one I just pick it up and you see the backlighting. The other ones we really weren't seeing that effect. Like a little, kind of not really with the butcher paper, but definitely we were not seeing that with the Skytone. So glassine is the easiest paper to backlight. And you get some really interesting effects where it looks super flat. It looks like a mathematically computed tessellation fold where you're not even sure whether the layers are on the top or the bottom, especially when it's held directly up against a light. So this one actually has the same folds on the top and the bottom. It's a isoarea hexagon. Well, actually, no, it's just 3 triangle twists on one side, 3 triangle twists on the other side, but you could also think of this center bit as an isoarea closed hexagon twist. So that's what's going on with this guy. Glassine, though, is a bit of a pain. Every single mark you make on the paper is visible in the end. If you have a grid line that's off by a millimeter, that will be visible in the end. If you have a fold that doesn't quite go where you need it to, that will be visible. It's very easy to crumple this paper. So, so one of the things I'll be going through, thank you, Catherine, for asking the question, is where you can get all of these papers at the end of the video. So glassine is something that I wouldn't recommend starting with, but it does have very stunning visual effects if you're willing to go through the aggravation of the extra attention in the gridding and the folding. So this is a paper that I only use for folding small gifts like this for family at Christmas. This one is a bigger butcher paper piece. So we saw that mini piece in butcher paper that I had laminated. I also use that for these larger pieces that I want, like that I would do in Skytone, but I don't feel like cutting up one of my massive sheets into a slightly bigger hexagon. I'd rather keep those for super massive hexagons. And we can see I've got a little stack of Skytone here. The Skytone is this wide and the butcher paper is significantly wider. So I can get a decently large hexagon out of the butcher paper. And that gives me room to fold, say, 80 or 96 grid divisions, where I would usually only fold 64 or 72 on the Skytone. Another nice paper to fold with, but really expensive, is handmade papers. This one is Origami and from Paper Circle. And this one I did specially for the Origami Olympiad the other year. And it's surprisingly nice to fold with, for surprisingly stiff and easy to squash for as thin of a paper as it is. And with it being a handmade paper, you do have some variations in thickness as you go across. If I was to do this project again, I would probably choose a different color. This is another one that comes in a bunch of colors. And I'm not so worried with this one about having the paper fade over time because of the specific pigment used by the paper makers. They were very careful to make it color fast, even in sunlight. Next up, we have a paper called Stardream, and there are variants on this. This is a commercially produced paper, and I'm going to be sharing a resource that has links to where to buy a lot of these different papers. This is very hard to backlight. Like when I hold it up, it's the same on both sides. It's kind of shiny. And this is a paper that I would only use if I'm going to frame something without any possibility of backlighting. So this piece, so another thing with the Stardream is it gets a little bit rubbery, a little bit leathery once you've gridded it. So I wouldn't grid super fine on this one like you can with a Skytone or an elephant hide or even Tant. You could fold your grid closer together than Stardream. So Skytone is my go-to. It comes in all these nice colors. I bulk order it and then resell it. So there's a link in the video description to see where to get a pack of Skytone paper. I also have packs that include a bone folder and hexagon templates that fit perfectly in these sheets. It also comes in much larger sheets. These 12.5 by 19-inch sheets that I typically use are actually a quarter of a much larger sheet, which is 25 by 38 inches. And I have a few of those stocked. I did take a look at the manufacturer's website this last week and saw that they're not selling those larger sheets in single sheet samples anymore. So those are going to be really hard to come by. Another paper that I've used that's really nice for tessellations that comes in large sizes is French marble from Origami Shop. I got a bunch of papers from Origami Shop while they still had the United States branch, or the North America branch, however you choose to say it. And these larger papers make really great tessellations. They grid well. They do come folded in half in both directions, so you're going to have a little bit of extra creases if you're doing a rotated grid, square grid. But you can get a lot of nice hexagons out of this. You can get whatever shapes you need. I also have a massive roll of like packaging paper that I haven't tried out yet, but I think would be nice for folding. But there's, yeah, all kinds of different papers that can be used for tessellations. My recommendation for beginners is the Skytone, and we'll get into a little bit of like price versus quality for folding. If price is an issue with the Skytone, I would recommend butcher paper or whatever you can find similarly wherever you're living. So say, for example, you live in Central America or South America or Southeast Asia, where these fancy origami papers are not necessarily available. Then the best thing you can do is go to your local print shop and ask, like, hey, what paper is used for certificates? What paper is used for like invitation envelopes? Because that's what Skytone is manufactured for. You can also go to a grocery or kitchen supply store and see what kind of wax paper or baking paper or butcher paper is available near you. The resource that I want to share is a site of paper reviews done by Ilan Garibi and Gadi Vishnay, and these reviews are super helpful. They go through a whole bunch of different categories to look at, okay, is this good for classic models, for action models, for tessellations, for complex models, modulars, 3D stuff, wet folding, and they give it a final score. The prices, I would say, that's something to look into for your local area. So they say that elephant hide is not that expensive, and they say that elephant hide is like $3 expensive, and Skytone is also $3 expensive. That's partly because they were doing this review in Israel and had to get the paper imported. So Skytone's made in the US, and it's not as expensive here in the US. It's more on the level of Tant if you get it through me, and then with me getting it in 1,200 sheet, like 1,200 massive sheet orders through the manufacturer, it's even less expensive than that. So you can go through and look and sort by different parameters. So they even have printer paper on here. Craft paper is another category that works really well depending on the thickness. It's not like there's a single kind of craft paper. There's craft paper for lunch bags, craft paper for grocery bags. Those are two very different thicknesses of paper. So whenever you're looking at what paper to use, you often want to see, okay, what GSM is it? Grams per square meter. And the papers that I've mentioned so far, we have elephant hide, Skytone, French marble, Origami, Stardream, Tant, let's see here, glassine, kami. Craft paper, I think, would be pretty similar to butcher paper, depending on the grams per square meter. And then printer paper. So pretty much all of these papers that I've been talking about are in this review site, which is linked below the video. And inside of each review, you can see, and these reviews are listed on a couple different websites, and this is just my favorite one to access. You can see more details if you click through, including how many different weights and what weights are there. So 110 GSM for the lighter elephant hide. The lighter sky tone is 89, so it's going to be easier on your hands. And it really doesn't sacrifice foldability. In fact, I would say the lighter sky tone has benefits instead of the elephant hide, because when you're folding, you can compress more layers into a smaller space. You can see what sizes it comes in, how many colors it comes in, how long it lasts, different characteristics of model suitability, and a whole write-up of how they made this review, how they got to these parameters, photos of different tessellations, well, some tessellations eventually, different patterns, different pieces, models that are made from each paper, and see what they're good for. So there's a whole wealth of information here in the paper reviews. Now, I will say, and one thing that I didn't show in here is they also usually mention where to buy it. There we go. These reviews are a little bit older and they haven't necessarily been updated, so the links won't necessarily be up to date, but there are good sources of information here nevertheless. One thing that I'll say specifically with the Skytone is these reviews were made before I started selling Skytone, so that's something that you're not going to see in the review itself. So here they just have 2 weights for the Skytone. There's actually 4 options made by the manufacturer, but depending where you live, you might not see all of the options. There's also a couple colors that have been discontinued by the manufacturer, so the colors on here are not necessarily going to be the colors that you would get from what's currently being produced. And then, like, in the last couple weeks, Mohawk, the manufacturer, moved the link where you can find Skytone, so that link to the manufacturer no longer works. You can also find printer-sized sheets of Skytone on Amazon, but you need to be really careful to get the lightest weight, so the 60T weight, as opposed to 80T or 60C or 80C. T is for text weight and 60 is the lighter of the 2 options. So you can do a whole bunch of different patterns with the Skytone, and it has these lovely light colors. So that's what I wanted to tell you about these papers. Does anyone have questions? I'm back looking at the chat again, and Ernesto, bienvenido. I'm glad that the tutorials have been useful for you. So there's a really wide range of prices and qualities of paper that can be used for folding origami tessellations. This one is among the most expensive at about $10–15 per sheet at a handmade paper. And the butcher paper is among the least expensive at $15 for a 100-foot roll. So that's like cents per piece. And then there's everything in between. The sky tone, the way I get it from the manufacturer, is around 13–15 cents per piece. But by the time that I sell it on, it's closer to something like a Tant that's around $1 a piece. And then the Stardream is a comparable price. You can get this in, I want to say, like 30 different colors or so. So craft paper, yeah, is basically brown packaging paper. There's more and less specific varieties of craft paper. So for example, I've seen Dirk Eisner fold with a, I think he calls it craft paper, but it's colored on one side and brown on the other and kind of stripy, and he gets it in rolls. He's in Germany, so that should also be accessible in the UK. There's, yeah, Origami Shop ships from France, so that's a great resource for all European folders and beyond. It's just going to cost more in shipping if you're outside of Europe. Tant is a great paper that you can also find online. Taro's Origami Shop sells it in the US, and you can also find it on Amazon in either 6-inch, aka 15 centimeter, or 30 or 35 centimeter packs. So that's another good option. There's, of course, elephant hide, which tends to be more on the $1+ per sheet, but does come in very large sizes, end of the spectrum. And then there's paper that you find wherever you are. So maps that people aren't using anymore, and getting into paper you find in your kitchen. So baking paper, wax paper, stuff like that. That's a little harder to work with, but makes some nice results for backlighting. It might also yellow with age. So this particular piece is about 6 years old. I'm noticing a little bit of yellowing. Some of that's going to be from oils absorbed from my hand during the folding process, but some of that's just going to be aging of papers that are not designed to make art. So that's what's going on with all these different papers. Of course, you can use kami. You can use printer paper. But to get the super nice visual effects, and especially to help you out a bit early on, I do recommend a sky tone or even a butcher paper. So yeah, budget is definitely a constraint, but that doesn't prevent you from folding origami tessellations. And there's lots of higher budget items as well, once you decide that you're ready for those.